The first thing you need to know about betrayal is that it always comes with a smile. My wife Allie stood in our kitchen that Tuesday morning, stirring her organic oat milk latte with one hand while scrolling through her phone with the other, and delivered the news that would change everything. "Dave, I've been thinking," she said, not looking up from her screen. "I'm moving in with Trevor, for better co-parenting with Emma." I nearly choked on my coffee. Trevor Brown, her ex-husband, the real estate hotshot with the perfect teeth and the BMW that probably cost more than my annual salary as a building maintenance supervisor. Emma was their 12-year-old daughter, and sure, co-parenting was important, but this was like saying you needed to sleep in a bank vault to better manage your checking account. Co-parenting, I repeated slowly, setting down my mug. Right. And I suppose this has nothing to do with Dylan Pierce helping you stretch after your yoga classes? Allie's perfectly manicured fingers paused on her phone screen. Dylan was the 29-year-old personal trainer at her gym, all abs and hair gel, the kind of guy who probably practiced his flex in every reflective surface he passed. Don't be ridiculous, Dave. This is about Emma's stability. You'll understand someday when you're more mature. Mature. Right. Because wanting your wife to actually live with you instead of her ex-husband was clearly the height of emotional immaturity. I watched her pack her feng shui crystals and co-parenting self-help books into designer boxes, making mental notes of every detail. The way she carefully wrapped her sacred goddess energy candles, the stack of romance novels with shirtless men on the covers, the birth control pills she thought I hadn't noticed, even though we'd been trying for a baby for 2 years. "Need help with those boxes?" I asked, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "Dylan's coming over to help," she said, not meeting my eyes. "He's so thoughtful." Of course he was. When Dylan arrived in his lifted truck, compensating much, I got a good look at the competition. Tank top despite the October chill, designer sneakers that cost more than most people's rent, and enough cologne to fumigate a small building. He gave me one of those bro nods that was supposed to be respectful, but came across as smug. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. "Hey man, sorry about this," he said, hefting Allie's suitcase like it weighed nothing. "Just helping a friend, you know?" "A friend? Sure. The kind of friend who sends good morning texts at 6 a.m. and late night thinking of you messages. I'd seen them, thanks to Allie's habit of leaving her phone face up on the counter. "No problem," I said, forcing a smile. "Friends help friends, right?" The drive to Trevor's house was a masterpiece of awkward silence. Allie sat in the passenger seat, checking her makeup in the mirror while I navigated through the upscale neighborhood where Trevor had built his perfect life. Manicured lawns, 3-car garages, the whole suburban dream package. Trevor was waiting on his front porch, looking like he'd stepped out of a real estate brochure. Khakis pressed to perfection, polo shirt that probably cost more than my work boots, and that practice smile he used on clients. "Dave," he called out, walking over with his hand extended. "Thanks for being so understanding about this. It really is what's best for Emma." I shook his hand, noting the firm grip that was supposed to establish dominance. "Of course. Family first, right?" "Exactly. You get it." He turned to Allie, and I watched his expression soften. "Your room is all ready. Emma's so excited you'll be here every day." As they unloaded Allie's things, I took a casual stroll to the mailbox. Beautiful thing, really. One of those fancy brick and copper numbers that screamed, "I have money and want everyone to know it." I pulled out a thick manila envelope from my jacket and slipped it inside, making sure it was visible enough that whoever checked the mail next wouldn't miss it. Walking back to my truck, I caught Allie watching me through the window. She waved, and I waved back, smiling like the understanding ex-husband I was supposed to be. "See you around," I called out to Trevor, who was directing Dylan on where to put Allie's exercise equipment. "Absolutely. We should grab a beer sometime, talk about the whole blended family thing." "I'd like that," I said, and I meant it. Just not in the way he thought. Driving home, I allowed myself a small smile. The envelope contained everything, screenshots of Allie's text conversations with Dylan, including some particularly graphic exchanges about what they wanted to do to each other. Voice memos from her gossipy friends Kim and Rachel, talking about Allie's liberation and how she deserved to explore her freedom. A timeline I'd carefully constructed showing Allie's lies about working late, her fake yoga classes, her mysterious weekend trips to visit her sister. But the real prize was the recording I'd made 3 nights ago, when Allie thought I was asleep. She'd been on the phone with Kim, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate both men, and how she planned to have her cake and eat it too. Her exact words, Trevor's got the money in the house, Dylan's got the body, and Dave's got the steady income. Why choose when I can have all three? My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend Pete. How'd it go? Act 1 complete, I typed back. Curtain up. The thing about revenge is that it requires patience. You can't just explode. That's what they expect, what they're prepared for. No, real revenge is like a slow leak in a tire. By the time they notice something's wrong, they're already stranded on the side of the road. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the truck for a moment, looking at the house Allie and I had shared for 3 years. It was modest compared to Trevor's palace, but it was honest. No pretense, no performance, just a place where people were supposed to love each other without games. My phone rang. Pete again. You okay, brother? Better than okay, I said. You know what they say about the best laid plans of mice and men? They often go awry? Not mine, I said, getting out of the truck. Mine are just getting started. The beautiful thing about truth is that it doesn't need embellishment. It just needs the right audience at the right time. I didn't have to wait long. 48 hours after I'd made my little mail delivery, my phone exploded with activity. The first call came at 6:30 a.m., Ali sobbing hysterically. Dave, you have to help me. Trevor threw me out. He won't let me see Emma, and his girlfriend found... She stopped, realizing what she was about to admit. Found what, Ali? I asked, sipping my coffee and enjoying the sunrise from my back porch. You know what? Don't play dumb. I'm afraid I don't. I'm just a simple maintenance guy, remember? Not mature enough to understand complex adult relationships. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Finally, she whispered, How could you do this to me? Do what? I haven't done anything to you, Ali. I just helped you move to your new living situation. How's that working out, by the way? The sobbing intensified. Through her tears, I pieced together what had happened. Trevor's new girlfriend, a sharp lawyer named Victoria, who'd been quietly dating him for months, had been the one to check the mail. She'd opened the envelope, reviewed the contents with the thoroughness of someone accustomed to examining evidence, and confronted Trevor immediately. Trevor, being the image-conscious businessman he was, had lost his mind. Not because he cared about Ali, but because he couldn't stand being made a fool of. The man who prided himself on reading people, on closing deals, on being 3 steps ahead, he'd been completely blindsided. According to Ali's tearful account, the confrontation had been spectacular. Victoria had spread the printed text messages across Trevor's granite kitchen island like she was presenting a case to a jury. The voice recordings played through his expensive sound system, Kim and Rachel's voices echoing through the house as they discussed Allie's manipulation tactics. He called me a whore, Allie sobbed. In front of Emma, his own daughter heard him say those things about her mother. I felt a pang of sympathy for Emma. The kid didn't deserve this. But Allie? She'd made her choices. Where are you staying? I asked. I'm at Kim's, but she's being weird about it. Dave, please, can I come home? We can work this out. I made a mistake, but... Home? I interrupted. This isn't your home anymore, Allie. You made that clear when you moved in with your ex-husband to play house with your boy toy. It wasn't like that. Really? Because I have recordings that suggest otherwise. The line went quiet. Then, in a voice so cold it could have frozen hell. What recordings? The one from Tuesday night. You remember when you thought I was asleep and you were on the phone with Kim, talking about how you plan to have your cake and eat it too? Ring any bells? I heard something crash in the background. Probably Allie throwing Kim's coffee mug against the wall. Kim's voice in the distance. What's wrong? What did he say? You recorded me, Allie said, her voice shaking with rage now instead of tears. That's illegal. Actually, it's not. Pennsylvania's a one-party consent state. I can record any conversation I'm a part of, and since it happened in my house with my wife, I was definitely a part of it. Funny how your law degree from Google University didn't cover that. More crashing sounds. Kim was definitely going to need new dishes. If you release that recording, you'll what? Leave me, move in with your ex-husband, sleep with your personal trainer? I think you've already played all those cards, sweetheart. The truth was, I had no intention of releasing the recording publicly. It was insurance, leverage for what came next. But Allie didn't need to know that. My second call came an hour later. Pete, laughing so hard he could barely speak. Dude, you have to see this. Mrs. Grady's been posting on the neighborhood Facebook group all morning. Apparently she witnessed the whole thing when Trevor kicked Allie out. Mrs. Grady was our 70-year-old neighbor, a retired teacher with a Ph.D. in other people's business and a social media presence that would make influencers weep with envy. If you wanted news to spread through our community, you couldn't ask for a better broadcaster. I pulled up the neighborhood group on my phone and scrolled through Mrs. Grady's posts. She documented everything with the thoroughness of a war correspondent. Well, neighbors, the drama on Maple Street continues. Saw that young woman who moved in with the real estate fellow getting thrown out this morning. Suitcases flying everywhere. The new girlfriend was there too, very professional looking. Heard shouting about text messages and recordings. The poor little girl was crying on the porch. Some people have no shame. The comments were already pouring in. Our neighborhood loved a good scandal, and Ali had provided premium entertainment. I recognized names from the community pool, the annual block parties, the school fundraisers. People who'd smiled at Ali, complimented her yoga pants, asked about her workout routine. Now they were dissecting her life like amateur psychologists. Always thought there was something off about that situation, wrote Janet from 2 streets over. What kind of woman moves in with her ex-husband when she's married to someone else? I saw her with that young man from the gym, added Bob Miller. Very cozy at Starbucks last month. Didn't look like personal training to me. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. Allie had gotten a new phone number, probably because Trevor had been paying for her old one. I screenshotted the message and added it to my growing collection of evidence. The third call came that afternoon. Dylan, trying to sound tough, but failing miserably. Yo, Dave, we need to talk. Do we? I can't imagine what we'd have to discuss. You know what you did, man. Allie's messed up because of you. Allie's messed up because of Ali, and you. Mostly you, actually. Congratulations on destroying a family for some quick fling. It wasn't like that. Sure it wasn't. Let me guess. You two connected on a deeper level? She understood you in ways no one else could? She made you feel like a real man? The silence told me I'd hit the mark. Look, Dylan continued, his voice losing its aggressive edge. Maybe we can work something out. I've got some money saved. You think this is about money? I laughed, genuinely amused. Kid, you're not even playing the same game as me. You're checkers. I'm chess. What's that supposed to mean? It means you should probably start looking for a new gym, and maybe a new town. Things are about to get very uncomfortable for you around here. I hung up and immediately called Pete. How do you feel about a little field trip tomorrow? I asked. What kind of field trip? The kind that involves fish guts and glitter. Pete was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll bring the truck. That evening, I sat on my porch with a beer, watching the sun set over the neighborhood where Allie and I had planned to build our life together. My phone had been buzzing all day. More Facebook drama, more gossip, more people picking sides in a war they didn't fully understand. But I understood. This was just the beginning. Tomorrow, Dylan would learn that actions have consequences. Next week, Trevor would discover that his perfect image could shatter just as easily as anyone else's. And Allie was about to find out what it really meant to lose everything. The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you incredible freedom. People expect the maintenance guy to fix their problems quietly and disappear. They don't expect him to be the problem. Time to change their expectations. Dylan's gym was one of those places that tried too hard to be intimidating. Black walls, heavy metal music, mirrors everywhere so the muscleheads could admire their own biceps between sets. I'd done maintenance work there before, back when Allie first started her fitness journey. The owner, Rick, was a decent guy who appreciated honest work and paid on time. Dave, Rick called out when Pete and I walked in at 7 a.m. Didn't expect to see you today? Something broken? Just a favor for a friend, I said, nodding toward the locker room. Dylan Pierce left something in his locker yesterday, asked me to grab it for him. He's running late for a client. Rick shrugged and handed me the master key. Locker 47. Just lock up when you're done. Pete and I made our way to the locker room, where I'd already confirmed Dylan kept his stuff. The beautiful thing about being a maintenance guy is that you become invisible. People see the uniform and the toolbox, and their brains just file you under background noise. Dylan's locker was exactly what you'd expect. Protein powder, hair products that cost more than most people's groceries, and about 6 different tank tops with motivational slogans. Beast mode. Train insane. No pain, no gain. The kind of philosophical depth you'd find in a fortune cookie. Pete pulled out the special mixture we'd prepared, a combination of fish guts from his cousin's bait shop and ultrafine craft glitter in a rainbow of colors. The smell was ungodly, and the glitter would stick to everything Dylan owned for months. You sure about this? Pete asked, though he was already opening the container. The man destroyed my marriage for Instagram-worthy abs and protein shakes, I said. I'm sure. We coated everything in Dylan's locker with our special blend, then added the finishing touch, a note written in glitter glue. Thanks for the workout. Karma. 20 minutes later, we were sitting in Pete's truck across the street, drinking coffee and waiting for the show to begin. Dylan arrived right on schedule, strutting through the parking lot in his usual uniform of overpriced athletic wear and misplaced confidence. "Think he'll make a scene?" Pete asked. "Oh, he'll make a scene? The question is how big." We didn't have to wait long. The screaming started about 5 minutes after Dylan disappeared into the locker room. Then came the sounds of retching. Apparently, the fish guts were even more effective than we'd hoped. Finally, Dylan emerged, covered head to toe in glittering slime, looking like a disco ball that had been dunked in a seafood restaurant's dumpster. The best part was the crowd. The morning rush at the gym included several people with phones, and in today's social media world, a glitter-bombed musclehead was prime content. Within minutes, Dylan was trending on local Instagram stories under hashtags like Darner Glitterbro and Fishy Fitness. Rick came out to see what the commotion was about, took one look at Dylan, and shook his head. "I don't know what you did, Pierce, but clean this mess up and find somewhere else to train. You're banned." Dylan's eyes swept the crowd, looking for someone to blame, someone to fight. His gaze landed on me sitting in Pete's truck, and for a moment our eyes met. I raised my coffee cup in a mock salute and smiled. He started walking toward us, leaving glittery footprints on the asphalt, but Rick grabbed his arm. "Not on my property," Rick said firmly. "Take your drama somewhere else." Pete and I drove away, leaving Dylan to deal with his sparkling humiliation alone. "Phase 2 complete," I said, pulling out my phone to check the social media damage. The videos were already spreading beyond our local area. Someone had even created a TikTok remix set to glitter and gold. "What's Phase 3? Pete asked. "Family court," I said. "Time to make this official." The family court mediation was scheduled for the following week. Allie had demanded a meeting to discuss custody arrangements for Emma, though everyone knew it was really about her trying to salvage some dignity from the wreckage of her life. I arrived early, dressed in my best suit, the one I'd worn to my father's funeral, and carrying a leather binder that I'd borrowed from my lawyer buddy Mike. The binder contained everything: printed text messages, voice recording transcripts, a timeline of Ali's deceptions, and even some financial records showing how she'd been using our joint credit card for her affairs. Ali showed up looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her designer clothes looked wrinkled. She'd brought Kim as moral support, which was like bringing a gasoline can to put out a fire. Trevor arrived with Victoria, both of them looking like they'd stepped out of a legal drama. Victoria carried her own binder, probably twice as thick as mine, and had the kind of focused intensity that made it clear she was here to win at any cost. The mediator, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Patterson, called us to order and began with the standard speech about cooperation and putting the children first. I let Ali go first, watching her stumble through a prepared statement about misunderstandings and working together for Emma's sake. When it was my turn, I stood up and placed my binder on the table. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that Mrs. Kavanagh has been engaging in systematic deception and manipulation that directly impacts the welfare of the child in question." I opened the binder and began reading selected text messages aloud. Ellie's face went white as her own words filled the room. "Dave's so clueless. He actually thinks I'm at yoga. Trevor's house is amazing. Emma deserves to live somewhere nice for once. Dylan says I'm the hottest older woman he's ever been with. Makes me feel alive again." Mrs. Patterson's expression grew more stern with each revelation. Victoria was taking notes, probably for future legal proceedings. Kim looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor, but the real bombshell came when I played the voice recording. Allie's conversation with Kim about manipulating all three men and having her cake and eating it, too. The room was silent, except for Allie's recorded laughter echoing from my phone speaker. "This is illegal," Allie finally exploded. "He recorded me without permission." "Actually," Victoria said smoothly, "Pennsylvania is a one-party consent state. The recording is perfectly admissible." Mrs. Patterson looked at Allie with the kind of disappointment usually reserved for repeat offenders. "Mrs. Kavanagh, these allegations are very serious. The court's primary concern is the welfare of the child, and this evidence suggests a pattern of deception and instability that—" "It's not what it looks like," Allie interrupted, tears streaming down her face. "I made mistakes, but I love Emma. I would never do anything to hurt her." "You already did," I said quietly. "The night Trevor threw you out, Emma heard everything. She heard him call you those names, heard you screaming, saw you being dragged out with your suitcases. You traumatized that little girl for a gym membership and some attention from a boy barely older than her babysitters." The mediation ended with Allie being granted supervised visitation only, and Trevor getting full custody pending a formal hearing. As we filed out of the room, Victoria cornered Allie in the hallway. "Let me make something very clear," Victoria said, her voice low but carrying clearly. "If you contact Trevor outside of official channels, if you show up at our house, if you do anything to disrupt Emma's stability, I will bury you in legal paperwork. I'm very good at my job, and I don't like people who hurt children." Allie looked around desperately, searching for an ally, but found none. Kim was already heading for the exit, probably realizing that her own dirty laundry might be the next to get aired. Trevor wouldn't meet her eyes, and me? I was enjoying the show too much to offer any comfort. "This isn't over, Dave," Allie said as we reached the parking lot. "You're right," I replied. "It's not." That evening, Pete and I celebrated at Murphy's Tavern, our usual dive bar where the beer was cheap and the bartender minded his own business. "So what's next?" Pete asked, raising his bottle in a toast. "Trevor's open house this weekend," I said, clinking my bottle against his. "Time to make sure everyone in town knows exactly what kind of people they've been dealing with." "And after that?" I smiled, thinking about the final phase of my plan, the piece de resistance that would ensure Ali and Dylan never forgot the consequences of their choices. "After that, we end this thing properly." Trevor's open house was scheduled for Sunday afternoon, a luxury showing for his latest listing, a 4-bedroom colonial in the most expensive part of town. He'd been advertising it all week on social media, probably hoping to rebuild his reputation after the Ali scandal had damaged his professional image. I knew about the open house because Emma had mentioned it during one of our awkward phone calls. The kid was caught in the middle of this mess, staying with Trevor and Victoria while Ali bounced between friends' couches and cheap motels. Emma had always liked me. I was the one who helped with her homework, taught her to change a tire, listened to her complain about boys and teachers and the general unfairness of being 12 years old. "Dave?" Emma had said during our last conversation. "Is my mom going to be okay?" The question hit me harder than I'd expected. For all my anger at Allie, Emma was innocent in this. She didn't deserve to have her family blown apart, even if her mother had lit the fuse. "She'll figure it out, kiddo," I'd told her. "Your mom's tougher than she looks." But toughness wasn't going to help Allie with what I had planned for Trevor's open house. Pete and I spent Saturday preparing. The plan required precision timing and some technical equipment that Pete had borrowed from his cousin who worked in audio-visual installation. We needed to access the house's sound system, one of those whole home setups that real estate agents loved to show off to potential buyers. "You sure this is going to work?" Pete asked as we tested the wireless transmitter for the 3rd time. "Trevor's the kind of guy who gives tours of every room, shows off every feature," I said. "He'll definitely demonstrate the sound system, and when he does..." The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. I'd edited together a greatest hits compilation of Ali's most damaging voice messages and text conversations, complete with Kim and Rachel discussing Ali's manipulation tactics and Dylan bragging about his conquest of an older married woman. The audio would play through Trevor's expensive speakers at full volume, broadcasting to every potential buyer in the house. Sunday afternoon, Pete and I positioned ourselves across the street from the open house, watching as well-dressed couples and families arrived to tour Trevor's listing. I recognized several faces, local business owners, neighbors from the upscale developments, people who moved in Trevor's social and professional circles. Trevor looked sharp in his navy blazer and crisp white shirt, greeting each visitor with his practiced realtor smile. Victoria was there too, playing the role of supportive girlfriend while probably keeping an eye out for any sign of Allie. At exactly 2:30, we saw Trevor gather the largest group of visitors in the living room, gesturing toward the built-in speakers and explaining the home's entertainment features. This was our moment. I activated the transmitter. Trevor's voice came through clearly at first. "As you can see, the whole home audio system allows you to enjoy music throughout the house with perfect clarity." Then Allie's voice cut in, crystal clear through the premium speakers. "Dave's so clueless about the money I'm spending on Dylan. He thinks my credit card bills are for groceries." Trevor's face went white. He lunged for the control panel, but the system had been overridden. Ali's voice continued, joined by Kim's laughter. "Girl, you are living dangerously. 3 men at once? You're like a soap opera character." The potential buyers stood frozen, unsure whether this was some kind of bizarre sales technique or a technical malfunction. Then Dylan's voice joined the mix, bragging to someone about his hot older client and describing their activities in graphic detail. "Turn it off!" Trevor shouted, frantically pressing buttons on the control panel. But the audio kept playing. Rachel's voice now, discussing Ali's plan to milk the situation for everything it's worth. Then Ali again, laughing about how she could play all 3 guys against each other. The crowd began to murmur, then whisper, then openly stare at Trevor as the implications became clear. These weren't random recordings. This was personal, intimate, devastating. Victoria appeared with a laptop, trying to access the system remotely, but Pete had designed the override to run for exactly 10 minutes, long enough to destroy Trevor's reputation, short enough to avoid serious legal consequences. The final recording was the crown jewel, Ellie's conversation with Kim about Emma, discussing how the girl was better off with Trevor's money anyway, and how Allie planned to use the custody thing to squeeze more cash out of both guys. By the time the audio finally stopped, the house was nearly empty. The potential buyers had fled, probably already texting their friends about the bizarre experience. Trevor stood alone in his expensive suit, looking like a man who'd just watched his career evaporate. "Did you get it all?" I asked Pete as we drove away. "Every second," he said, patting the camera he'd used to record the chaos. "This is going viral by tonight." He was right. Within hours, Real Estate Revenge was trending on local social media. Someone had filmed the whole thing on their phone, and the video was spreading faster than gossip at a high school reunion. The comments were brutal. Who would buy a house from this guy after that drama? Imagine having that much personal chaos and trying to sell someone their dream home. Is this what passes for customer service in real estate now? Trevor's business phone was probably ringing off the hook with canceled appointments and lost clients. In the real estate world, reputation was everything, and his was now radioactive. But I wasn't done with him yet. Monday morning, I called Trevor's office and left a message with his secretary. "This is Dave Kavanagh. Tell Mr. Brown I'd like to schedule that beer he mentioned. I think we have a lot to discuss." He called back within an hour, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "What do you want?" "Just to talk," I said. "Man to man. Father figure to father figure. You know, about Emma's welfare." "You stay away from Emma. You stay away from all of us." Trevor, I said, adopting the patronizing tone he'd used on me so many times. "Is that any way to talk to family? After all, I was married to your daughter's mother. That makes us practically relatives." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Besides," I continued, "I think Emma deserves to know the truth about why her mother really moved in with you. Don't you think she's old enough to understand that Mommy was playing house with Daddy and her boyfriend at the same time?" "You son of a—" "Language, Trevor. Remember, you're the respectable businessman here, the pillar of the community, the guy who just had his dirty laundry aired in front of half the town's social elite." I could hear him breathing heavily, probably fighting the urge to drive over and confront me in person. "What do you want?" he repeated. "Nothing you can give me," I said. "I just want you to remember something. Ali didn't just betray me. She betrayed Emma too. Every lie she told, every game she played, every time she chose her own selfish desires over her daughter's stability, that's on both of you now." I hung up before he could respond. That afternoon, Allie showed up at my house. I'd been expecting her, had even left the front door unlocked. She looked terrible, hair unwashed, clothes wrinkled, the kind of desperate exhaustion that comes from having your entire life collapse in slow motion. "You destroyed everything," she said, standing in my living room like an unwelcome ghost. "I didn't destroy anything," I replied, settling into my favorite chair. "I just turned on the lights so everyone could see what was already there. Trevor won't take my calls. Dylan blocked my number. Kim and Rachel won't return my texts. I have nothing left." "You have exactly what you chose," I said. "You chose Dylan over me. You chose Trevor's house over our home. You chose games and lies over honesty. This is what those choices look like." She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing with the kind of raw desperation that might have moved me a month ago. Now it just sounded like noise. "I made mistakes, but I loved you," she said through her tears. "No, you didn't. You loved what I represented. Stability, security, someone to fall back on when your adventures got too risky. But you never loved me." "That's not true." "Then why did you record yourself laughing about how clueless I was? Why did you tell your friends I was just your backup plan?" She had no answer for that. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "You're going to leave town. Maybe go stay with your sister in Arizona like you always talked about. You're going to get yourself together, find a job, build a real life instead of this fantasy you've been living." "I can't leave Emma." "Emma's better off without you right now. Maybe someday, when you've figured out how to be a real mother instead of a selfish child, you can have a relationship with her, but not now." Allie looked up at me with something like hope in her eyes. "And if I do that, if I leave and get my life together, will you stop this revenge campaign?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Ali, sweetheart, this isn't a negotiation. This is consequences. You don't get to bargain your way out of the mess you made." She left without another word, and I knew I'd never see her again. At least, not in any way that mattered. But Dylan? Dylan was still around, still posting shirtless selfies on Instagram, still pretending that glitter bomb incident had been some kind of prank instead of public humiliation. Dylan needed one final lesson in cause and effect, and I knew exactly how to deliver it. Dylan Pierce was the kind of man who thought consequences were something that happened to other people. Even after the gym incident, even after Allie's public meltdown, he was still posting workout videos and motivational quotes on social media like nothing had changed. His latest Instagram story showed him at a new gym across town, flexing in the mirror with the caption, "Haters gonna hate, but champions keep grinding." The arrogance was almost impressive. I'd been watching his patterns for weeks, learning his schedule, understanding his routines. Dylan was predictable in the way that shallow people often are. He went to the same coffee shop every morning, worked out at the same time, hit the same bars on weekend nights looking for his next conquest. What he didn't know was that his reputation had preceded him everywhere he went. The gym incident had made him locally famous in all the wrong ways, and Ali's recorded confessions had painted him as exactly what he was, a predator who targeted married women for sport. Pete and I were sitting in Murphy's Tavern on Thursday night, planning the final phase, when Dylan walked in like he owned the place. He'd clearly been drinking already. His swagger was more pronounced than usual, and he kept checking his phone like he was expecting important messages that weren't coming. "Well, well," Pete muttered. "Look what the cat dragged in." Dylan spotted me almost immediately. In a town this size, avoiding each other forever was impossible. He made his way over to our table, that familiar smirk plastered across his face. "Dave, right?" he said, as if we hadn't spoken on the phone. "Mind if I sit?" "It's a free country," I said, gesturing to an empty chair. Dylan sat down and ordered a beer, then turned to face me with what he probably thought was a winning smile. "Look, man, I know things got weird with the alley situation, but that's all behind us now, right? No hard feelings?" I almost laughed. No hard feelings, like he'd accidentally bumped into me at the grocery store instead of systematically destroying my marriage. "Where is Allie these days?" I asked conversationally. "How would I know? We're not together anymore. That whole thing was just... You know how it is. Sometimes people connect, sometimes they don't. No big deal." Pete made a sound that might have been a cough, or might have been barely suppressed laughter. "No big deal," I repeated. "Interesting perspective. So breaking up a marriage, traumatizing a 12-year-old girl, destroying multiple families, that's all just no big deal to you?" Dylan's smile faltered slightly. "Hey, I never meant for anyone to get hurt. Ali came on to me, not the other way around. I was just... available. Available. That's one way to put it." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Dylan trying to rewrite history and me letting him dig his own grave deeper. He painted himself as the victim, the innocent party who'd been seduced by an older woman and then abandoned when things got complicated. According to his version, Ali had pursued him relentlessly, lied about her marriage status, and promised to leave both Trevor and me for him. Some of it might have even been true. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that Dylan still didn't understand what he'd done wrong. He saw it all as a game, a series of moves and counter-moves with no real consequences for real people. Even now, even after watching Ali's life implode, he thought he could charm his way out of responsibility. "You know what your problem is, Dylan?" I said finally. "What's that? You think this is over?" His smile disappeared completely. "What do you mean?" I stood up, threw some money on the table for my beer, and looked down at him. "I mean, you destroyed my marriage for fun, and you think a couple of embarrassing incidents makes us even. You're not very good at math." Pete and I left him sitting there, probably wondering if that was a threat or a promise. The answer was both. The next morning, I put the final phase into motion. Dylan's weakness wasn't just vanity, it was his need to be seen as successful, desirable, alpha. He drove a lifted truck that was worth more than most people's annual salary, wore expensive clothes, and lived in a trendy downtown loft that he was constantly showing off on social media. What Dylan didn't know was that his truck payments were 3 months behind. I knew this because my cousin worked at the dealership where he'd bought it, and financial information has a way of circulating among people who know how to ask the right questions. A few phone calls, a small cash payment to the right person, and Dylan's truck was repossessed on Friday afternoon while he was having lunch at his favorite cafe. The tow truck driver was efficient and professional, but the timing was perfect, right during the lunch rush, with half the downtown crowd watching through the cafe windows. Dylan came running out just as his precious truck was being loaded onto the flatbed, screaming about payments and contracts and lawyers. The tow truck driver handed him some paperwork and drove away, leaving Dylan standing on the sidewalk in front of an audience of his peers. But that was just the opening act.
Phase 2 involved Dylan's landlord, a businessman named Frank who owned several downtown properties. Frank and I had worked together before. I'd done maintenance on his buildings, and he respected honest work and straight talk. When I explained Dylan's situation and showed him the evidence of Dylan's predatory behavior, Frank was very interested in finding a reason to terminate Dylan's lease. It turned out Dylan had been violating several lease terms, unauthorized guests, noise complaints, and some questionable modifications to the apartment that hadn't been approved. Frank served him with eviction papers on Saturday morning.
By Sunday, Dylan was essentially homeless, carless, and rapidly running out of friends willing to help him. His social media had gone quiet, probably because it's hard to post motivational content when your life is falling apart in real time. That's when I made my final move. I called Dylan's phone Sunday evening. He answered on the first ring, probably hoping it was someone offering help. "We need to talk," I said. "Dave, look, man, I don't know what you're trying to prove, but Murphy's Tavern, 9 o'clock. Come alone." I hung up before he could argue. I knew Pete wanted to come as backup, but this wasn't something I could delegate. This was personal. Dylan had been a catalyst in the collapse of everything I had worked for, and now it was time to face him alone, to make him understand the weight of his actions. When I walked into Murphy's Tavern, Dylan was already sitting at a booth in the back, looking like he had aged 5 years in the span of a week. The usual swagger, the confidence he once wore like a shield, was completely gone. In its place was a jittery, desperate energy, the kind that only comes from watching your entire world crumble to dust. He was sweating, his hands were shaking, and his eyes were red and tired. He looked like a man who realized too late that he had crossed a line he couldn't come back from. He barely acknowledged me as I slid into the booth across from him. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice rough, almost pleading. "I want you to understand something," I said, leaning forward, my gaze locking onto his. "This isn't about revenge anymore. This is about consequences. You made choices, and choices have results." He scoffed, though the bravado was weak, more of a reflex than a genuine challenge. "I get it, okay? I screwed up. But this is insane. You've destroyed my entire life over one mistake." "One mistake?" I repeated, my voice calm but firm. "Dylan, you didn't make one mistake. You made a series of deliberate choices over several months. You chose to pursue a married woman. You chose to help her lie to her husband. You chose to participate in breaking up a family. You chose to brag about it to your friends. Those weren't mistakes, Dylan. Those were decisions, conscious, calculated decisions." He went silent then, staring at me with a mix of anger and realization. The arrogance that had once defined him had evaporated, replaced by a dawning awareness that this wasn't going to end with an apology or a promise to never do it again. There were no easy outs for him anymore. "I don't even know where to start," he muttered after a long pause. "What happens now?" "Now you leave town," I said simply. "You pack whatever's left of your stuff, and you go somewhere else to start over. Somewhere far enough away that you'll never accidentally run into Emma at a school event or a grocery store. No more chances for you to get in the way of the people who are trying to rebuild their lives. You've done enough damage here. And if I don't?" His voice was barely a whisper, but the question hung heavy between us. He was testing the waters, unsure of how far I would push him. I smiled, a cold, unsettling smile that I had spent months perfecting. Dylan actually flinched, like he could see the storm behind my calm demeanor. "Then I start making phone calls. To your family back in Ohio, to your ex-girlfriends, to every gym and fitness center within 100 miles of here. I tell them exactly what kind of man you are, and then I provide evidence to back it up." The color drained from his face, his pupils widening in alarm. "You can't do that," he stammered, his voice cracking. "It's harassment. You can't just go around telling people about me, about what happened. It's public information," I interrupted, my voice ice cold. "Allie's recorded confessions are a matter of court record now, thanks to the custody hearing. Your own bragging about your conquests is documented. I'm not threatening to lie about you, Dylan. I'm threatening to tell the truth about you everywhere you go." His jaw clenched, his eyes darting nervously around the dimly lit room, probably wondering just how far I was willing to go. For a long while, we sat in silence, the weight of his situation settling over him like a suffocating blanket. I let the silence linger, watching as the realization spread across his face that he was out of options. There were no more people he could manipulate, no more places to hide. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he nodded, his shoulders slumped, defeated. "Fine, I'll leave. But this isn't over. You think you're going to walk away from this unscathed?" I leaned back in the booth, my posture casual, though my eyes were hard as steel. No, Dylan, it's over for you. Oh, you just haven't figured that out yet? But you're right about one thing. It won't be over for me. Not until I know you understand exactly what you did. You don't get to ruin lives and walk away without paying the price. He opened his mouth, no doubt to protest further, but closed it again as he saw the finality in my expression. There was no room for negotiation, no further debate. The only way out for him was to leave, to vanish, to make sure he never crossed paths with the people who mattered again. You've got one shot at this, I said, my voice low but lethal. Don't waste it. And with that, Dylan stood, his movements slow and reluctant. He grabbed his bag and walked out the door without another word. I stayed where I was for a few minutes, letting the tension bleed out of my muscles. He was gone. He had nothing left but the consequences of his choices, and I had no intention of letting him forget them. I paid the bill, my hands still steady but my mind racing. I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but I was ready. Ready for whatever came next because I knew I had won. And Dylan? He would always know deep down that the good guys don't lose, not in the end. How long do I have? 1 week, I said. After that, I start making calls. Dylan left without another word, and I knew I'd never see him again. Unlike Allie, who might someday find a way to rebuild her relationship with Emma, Dylan was just gone, erased from our lives as completely as if he'd never existed. I sat in the tavern for another hour, nursing my beer and thinking about the wreckage of the last month. 3 lives destroyed, a child traumatized, a community scandalized, all because 2 selfish people thought they could take whatever they wanted without paying the price. The bartender, an old-timer named Mickey who'd been serving drinks at Murphy's since before I was born, came over to refill my glass. "Heard you've been having some excitement lately," he said conversationally. That's one way to put it. "You know, I've been tending bar for 37 years, Mickey said, wiping down glasses with practiced efficiency. "Seen a lot of people make a lot of bad choices. Most of them think they're the first person to ever have their particular problem. And they're always wrong. Cheating spouses, lying friends, people who think the rules don't apply to them. It's all been done before. The only thing that changes is the names." I nodded, understanding his point. "So what's the moral of the story?" Mickey smiled, the kind of wise smile that comes from decades of watching human nature play out in barstool confessions and closing time revelations. "The moral," he said, "is that some people learn from consequences, and some people just become consequences for other people to learn from." As I drove home that night, I thought about Mickey's words. Ali and Dylan had become consequences. Cautionary tales that would be whispered about at neighborhood barbecues and school pickup lines for years to come. Their names would be synonymous with betrayal and selfishness. Their story a reminder of what happens when people think they can take whatever they want without paying the price. But for me, it was finally over. Or so I thought. I should have known it wouldn't end quietly. People like Ali and Dylan don't just slink away into the night. They thrash and fight and make one last desperate play for relevance. The call came on a rainy Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after my conversation with Dylan at Murphy's Tavern. "Dave, you need to get over here now." It was Victoria, Trevor's girlfriend, and she sounded rattled. "Allie's here, and she's lost her mind." I grabbed my keys and drove through the downpour to Trevor's house, my windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the storm. The scene that greeted me was like something out of a disaster movie. Allie's car was parked sideways across Trevor's driveway, both doors open, rain pouring into the interior. She was standing on Trevor's front porch, soaking wet, screaming at the closed door while pounding on it with her fists. "I have rights," she was yelling. "She's my daughter. You can't keep her from me." Through the front window, I could see Emma sitting on the living room couch, her face pale and frightened. Victoria was on the phone, probably with the police, while Trevor stood guard at the door like he was expecting Allie to break it down. I parked on the street and approached slowly, not wanting to escalate an already volatile situation. Allie saw me coming and whirled around, her hair plastered to her head, mascara running down her cheeks in black streams. "You!" she screamed, pointing at me like I was the devil himself. "This is all your fault. Everything was fine until you—" "Everything was fine?" I interrupted, raising my voice to be heard over the rain and her hysteria. "Allie, you were sleeping with your personal trainer while living with your ex-husband and lying to everyone involved. That's not fine. That's insane. I made mistakes, but I never hurt anyone. You hurt Emma. Look at her." I gestured toward the window where the 12-year-old was watching her mother's public breakdown. "She's terrified of you right now." That seemed to penetrate Allie's rage-fueled delusion. She turned to look at the window, and for a moment her expression softened as she saw her daughter's frightened face. But the moment didn't last. A new voice cut through the storm. Ali, baby, I came as soon as I got your message. Dylan came jogging up the driveway, apparently having ignored my advice about leaving town. He looked as desperate as Ali, unshaven, wearing clothes that had seen better days, the kind of manic energy that comes from having nothing left to lose. Dylan? I called out, genuinely surprised. I thought we had an understanding. Screw your understanding, he shouted back. I'm not running away from you anymore. This was spiraling out of control, fast. Ali and Dylan were feeding off each other's desperation, and with Emma watching from inside, the situation was becoming dangerous for everyone involved. Trevor opened the front door, probably against his better judgment. All of you need to get off my property right now, he said, trying to project authority but mostly just sounding scared. The police are on their way. The police? Ali laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Perfect. Let them come. Let them hear about how you stole my daughter, how Dave destroyed my life, how everyone conspired against me. Nobody conspired against you, Victoria said, appearing behind Trevor. You destroyed your own life with your choices. My choices? Ali's voice rose to a shriek. I chose to be happy. I chose to live instead of just existing. I chose to feel alive instead of being married to a boring maintenance man who never understood me. The words hit like physical blows, but I kept my expression neutral. This wasn't about my hurt feelings anymore. This was about ending this nightmare before someone got seriously hurt. You're right, I said, and everyone stopped shouting to stare at me. You made choices, and now you get to live with them. I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app. But before the police get here, why don't you tell everyone exactly what those choices were? Tell Emma what you really thought about her when you were planning to use her for money. Tell Dylan what you said about him being just a boy toy. Tell Trevor what you said about manipulating him. You did. I have recordings, remember? But maybe you'd like to make a new one, a live performance for everyone here. Ali looked around wildly, realizing that she was surrounded by people who knew the truth about her. Trevor, who'd seen the evidence of her manipulation, Victoria, who'd witnessed the aftermath of her lies, Dylan, who was finally understanding that he'd been used just as much as everyone else, and me, the boring maintenance man who'd turned out to be much more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. This isn't over, she said, but her voice had lost its manic edge. The fight was draining from her as the reality of the situation settled in. She was no longer the angry, desperate woman who had barged into my life. Now, she was just someone who had to face the consequences of her actions, someone whose delusions were crumbling around her. Yes, it is, I said firmly, my words cutting through the last remnants of her defiance. It's been over for weeks. You just haven't accepted it yet. The words hung in the air for a moment, and for a brief second, I thought I saw the faintest flicker of understanding in her eyes. But it didn't matter anymore. Nothing she said or did could change what had already been set in motion. At that moment, the sound of sirens broke the silence, and 2 officers in rain gear pulled up to the curb. They looked like they'd rather be anywhere else on a night like this, but they had a job to do. They approached us with the kind of practiced indifference that only comes from handling situations like this day in and day out. They separated everyone, took statements from each of us, and eventually convinced Ali and Dylan to leave the property. No arrests were made, but warnings were issued about harassment and trespassing. It was over. The legal side of it, at least. The emotional aftermath was something we'd all have to deal with in our own time. As the police cars drove away, I found myself standing alone with Trevor and Victoria on their front porch. The rain was still coming down in sheets, but the storm seemed to be passing. It was like the storm in my life was finally letting up, even if the remnants of it still lingered in the air. Is it really over? Trevor asked, his voice hesitant, as if he wasn't sure whether to believe it. For you? Yes, I said. Ali will probably try to rebuild her life somewhere else, start fresh. And Dylan will find some other married woman to manipulate. But they're done here. For good. Victoria nodded, but her expression was still heavy with concern. What about Emma? She's been through so much. She didn't deserve any of this. I looked through the window into the living room at the little girl who had been caught in the crossfire of adult selfishness and stupidity. She had seen more than any child should have to, and her world had been turned upside down because of the choices made by the adults around her. But Emma was strong. I knew that. She was resilient, and with Trevor and Victoria's help, she had the support system she needed. Emma's tough, I said softly, my gaze lingering on her as she sat quietly, playing with her toys. And she's got you 2 looking out for her now. She'll be okay. Victoria gave me a small, appreciative smile, but I could see the weight of the situation still pressing on her. She had done her best to protect Emma, and in many ways I knew she had saved her from the worst of it. But even with that, there were scars that would take time to heal. I turned and walked back to my truck, feeling the weight of the last month settling on my shoulders like the rain. I didn't mind it, though. The weight felt different now. It wasn't a burden. It was just a reminder of everything I had fought for, everything I had lost, and everything I was finally starting to regain. As I drove home through the empty streets, I thought about consequences and choices, about the price of revenge and the cost of justice. It had taken a lot for me to get here, to this moment of clarity, but I knew I was better for it, stronger, more sure of who I was and what I would never tolerate again. My phone buzzed with a text from Pete. Heard there was some excitement at Trevor's. You okay? I didn't hesitate before typing back. It's finished. All of it. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, staring at the house where Allie and I had once planned to build a life together. It was empty now, nothing but memories and might-have-beens. The windows were dark, the room silent. It was a house full of ghosts now, ghosts of a future that would never be. All of it, I confirmed, my voice quiet, final. Inside, I poured myself a drink and sank into my favorite chair. The rain still beat against the roof, its rhythmic sound oddly soothing. As I sat there, the events of the past few months played out in my mind, one after another. Betrayal, deception, rage, and finally, justice. It had been a whirlwind, but now I was here. I was still standing. Tomorrow I would go back to work, back to fixing other people's problems, back to maintaining the infrastructure that kept the world running smoothly. It was a kind of peace, that routine. I knew I'd probably run into people at the grocery store or the gas station who had heard about the drama, who'd want to gossip or take sides or offer unsolicited advice. But I wasn't worried about them. I had bigger things to focus on now. For the first time in months, I felt something approaching peace. The people who'd betrayed me were gone, scattered to whatever consequences awaited them. Ali would try to rebuild, but I knew she would always carry the weight of her actions with her. Dylan would move on to someone else, leaving behind the wreckage of his manipulation. And Emma? She was surrounded by people who loved her, who would help her heal, even if the scars of what had happened would stay with her for a long time. As for me, I was exactly where I'd always been, home, honest, and free of the toxic games that had nearly destroyed everything I cared about. It wasn't the end of a story, but the beginning of something new, something that was mine to shape. The rain continued to fall, washing away the last traces of the storm, and I allowed myself a small smile. Some people learn from consequences, Mickey the bartender had said. Some people just become consequences for others to learn from. Ali and Dylan had become cautionary tales, their names forever linked with betrayal, selfishness, and arrogance in our small community's collective memory. Their story would be told and retold, a warning about what happens when people think they can take whatever they want without paying the price. They would be the example, the living proof of what happens when you don't respect the lives and trust of others. But my story was just beginning again. I had the rest of my life ahead of me, and I was no longer bound by the past. I had learned, I had grown, and now it was time to move forward. I raised my glass in a silent toast to new beginnings, to hard-earned wisdom, and to the simple satisfaction of watching justice served cold on a rainy Tuesday night. Outside, the storm was finally passing, and tomorrow would dawn clear and bright with possibility.